This is a marketing holocaust. 24 hours a day. For the rest of our lives, the powers that be are hard at work, dumbing us to death.
Well, this is basically the story of the 20th century consumer society. It is a story that grew over decades and became stronger and stronger. It starts with the positive outlook in the future. We believe in a bright future. Technology will make our production system ever more efficient, so we can produce more stuff at higher speed and lower costs. We buy that stuff because by buying stuff, we become someone. We belong somewhere. We increase our happiness. In recent years, this story has received a bit of competition. There's another story going around. And this is basically the story about the side effects of the first story. We buy stuff all the time, we feel empty and get depressions. It's an apocalyptic future.
What the experience of beauty is.
What does the human animal see as sexy?
Living things are bounded physical entities.
From a scientific point of view, the meaning of life is the propagation of DNA.
We can say that the experience of beauty is one of the ways that evolution has of arousing and sustaining interest or fascination, even obsession, in order to encourage us toward making the most adaptive decisions for survival and reproduction.
Women use makeup to enhance their sexual attractiveness.
What does it mean to grow up in a pornified culture?
Women are not making it to the top of any profession anywhere in the world.
The dominance hierarchy as a structure is at least 300 million years old.
The general tendency of the universe is to move from order and structure to lack of order, lack of structure, in fact to mush.
Consumption decisions aggregate in large-scale environmental problems. There will be more migration, more poverty, more wars, less water.
We live in a materialist society, so we judge status very often in our country based on how much money you make, right? So any conspicuous display of wealth raises your status.
You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything.
The only reason why some people are able to pursue private luxury is that other people aren't.
Because they're making us believe that we are rich or wealthy because we can buy a lot. But inside it, they're making us poorer.
Celebrity is the handmaiden of consumerism. It is absolutely essential to the system.
They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all.
What we see around us is staggering complexity. Eric Beinhocker estimates that in New York City alone, there are some 10 billion SKUs or distinct commodities being traded. That's hundreds of times as many species as there are on Earth. And they're being traded by a species of almost 7 billion individuals who are linked by trade, travel, and the internet into a global system of stupendous complexity. The general tendency of the universe is to move from order and structure to lack of order, lack of structure, in fact to mush. So here's a great puzzle. In a universe ruled by the second law of thermodynamics, how is it possible to generate the sort of complexity I've described, the sort of complexity represented by you and me and the convention center? Well, planets are great, and our early Earth was almost perfect. It was just the right distance from its star to contain huge oceans of liquid water. And deep beneath those oceans, at cracks in the Earth's crust, you've got heat seeping up from inside the Earth, and you've got a great diversity of elements. So at those deep oceanic vents, fantastic chemistry began to happen. And atoms combined in all sorts of exotic combinations. But of course, life is more than just exotic chemistry. How do you stabilize those huge molecules that seem to be viable? Well, it's here that life introduces an entirely new trick. You don't stabilize the individual, You stabilize the template, the thing that carries information, and you allow the template to copy itself. And DNA, of course, is the beautiful molecule that contains that information. You'll be familiar with the double helix of DNA. Each rung contains information. So DNA contains information about how to make living organisms. And DNA also copies itself. So it copies itself and scatters the templates through the ocean. So the information spreads. Notice that information has become part of our story.
From a scientific point of view, the meaning of life is the propagation of DNA, but that's not what I feel. That's not the meaning of my life. So the meaning of my life is something which is probably different from yours and different from other people's, but we each make our own meaning. And these are short-term goals, well, maybe even quite long-term goals, which are set up by our brains, which have goal-seeking machinery built into them. But what we don't feel motivated by the desire to pass on our DNA, mostly. We have other goals, which can be very moving, very important. They could even be called spiritual in some cases. And they are a far cry from the fundamental biological goal, which is the propagation of DNA. But the machinery that enables us to set up these higher level goals is originally programmed into us by natural selection of DNA.
We often tend to think that of human beings as somehow the crown of creation, as it's sometimes put, as having evolved specifically to understand ourselves and to understand the world. And we take our gigantic forebrains to be evidence of that. But we forget when we do that evolution doesn't really care at all about what we understand, whether about ourselves or others. It only cares about making us beings who will live to reproduce, children who will live to reproduce.
DNA is, in effect, learning. It's accumulating new ways of making living organisms because some of those errors work. So DNA is learning and it's building greater diversity and greater complexity. And we can see this happening over the last 4 billion years. For most of that time of life on Earth, living organisms have been relatively simple, single cells, but they had great diversity and inside great complexity.
Living things are bounded physical entities. The bounded entity is the chemical and informational machine, and then critically, that informational chemical machine in a bounded entity has a hereditary system that determines how it works, a system which has variability, and therefore the whole thing can evolve by natural selection. And that means that the living thing can acquire purpose to be better adapted in the life state it finds itself, and so we can evolve living things from one type into another. And for me, that bounds everything together that emphasizes the core principles underlying life.
Then from about 600 to 800 million years ago, multi-celled organisms appear. You get fungi, you get fish, you get plants, you get amphibians, you get reptiles, and then of course you get the dinosaurs. Humans appeared about 200,000 years ago.
Have you ever thought about the fact that you're here, you're alive on this planet because every one of your ancestors reproduced? Every one in an unbroken chain going all the way back to the first life on this planet over 3.5 billion years ago. That's a lot of reproducing.
We've seen that DNA learns, in a sense. It accumulates information, but it is so slow. DNA accumulates information through random errors that some of which just happen to work. But DNA had actually generated a faster way of learning. It had produced organisms with brains. And those organisms can learn in real time. They accumulate information, they learn. The sad thing is, when they die, the information dies with them. Now, what makes humans different is human language. We are blessed with a language, a system of communication so powerful and so precise that we can share what we've learned with such precision that it can accumulate in the collective memory. And that means it can outlast the individuals who learnt that information, and it can accumulate from generation to generation. And that's why, as a species, we're so creative and so powerful, and that's why we have a history. We seem to be the only species in 4 billion years to have this gift. I call this ability collective learning. We evolved as a species in the savanna lands of Africa. But then you see humans migrating into new environments, into desert lands, into jungles, into the Ice Age tundra of Siberia, tough environment, into the Americas, into Australasia. Each migration involved learning new ways of exploiting the environment, new ways of dealing with their surroundings. Then 10,000 years ago, exploiting a sudden change in global climates with the end of the last Ice Age, humans learned to farm. Farming was an energy bonanza, and exploiting that energy, human populations multiplied, human societies got larger, denser, more interconnected. And then, from about 500 years ago, humans began to link up globally through shipping, through trains, through telegraph, through the internet, until now we seem to form a single global brain of almost 7 billion individuals, and that brain is learning at warp speed. And in the last 200 years, something else has happened. We've stumbled on another energy bonanza in fossil fuels. So fossil fuels and collective learning together explain the staggering complexity we see around us.
What the experience of beauty is. This is an extremely complicated subject. It's in the eye of the beholder. It's whatever moves you personally. Or, as some people, especially academics, prefer, beauty is in the culturally conditioned eye of the beholder. There are many differences among the arts, but there are also universal cross-cultural aesthetic pleasures and values. How can we explain this universality? The best answer lies in trying to reconstruct a Darwinian evolutionary history of our artistic and aesthetic tastes. The experience of beauty is one component in a whole series of Darwinian adaptations. Evolution operates by two main primary mechanisms. The first of these is natural selection, that's random mutation and selective retention. The other great principle of evolution is sexual selection.
Think of the 3 drawbacks to a male peacock of growing such a hugely ornate tail. Number 1 is the energy, vitamins, and minerals needed to go into the creation of the tail could have been used for other survival reproductive needs. Number 2, the tail makes it more likely to be spotted by a predator. Number 3, if spotted, this bulky tail makes it less likely to get away from a predator. All 3 of these negative fitness hits must have been outweighed by the female peahen's preference for males with larger, more ornate tails. Sexual competition, in this example and in many cases in nature, has been a stronger force than natural selection. Humans don't have peacock tails, so how does this even apply to us? While it's true that humans do not have biological displays of sexual health and good genes anywhere as extravagant as a peacock's tail, but does this mean we don't have them at all?
Many experiments have shown that a few basic parameters contributes to what makes a face attractive. These include averaging, symmetry, and the effects of hormones. Composite or average faces are typically more attractive than each individual face that contributes to the average. This laboratory finding fits with many people's intuitions. Average faces represent the central tendencies of a group. People with mixed features represent different populations and presumably harbor greater genetic diversity and adaptability to the environment. many people find mixed-race individuals attractive and inbred families less so. The second factor that contributes to beauty is symmetry. People generally find symmetric faces more attractive than asymmetric ones. Developmental abnormalities are often associated with asymmetries, and in plants, animals, and humans, asymmetries often arise from parasitic infections. Symmetry, it turns out, is also an indicator of health. The third factor that contributes to facial attractiveness is the effect of hormones. Estrogen and testosterone play important roles in shaping features that we find attractive. Estrogen produces features that signal fertility. Men typically find women attractive who have elements of both youth and maturity. A face that's too baby-like might mean that the girl is not yet fertile. So men find women attractive who have large eyes, full lips, and narrow chins as indicators of youth, and high cheekbones as an indicator of maturity.
What are these sexual signals? What does the human animal see as sexy? Throughout the animal kingdom, males are attracted to females who transmit signals of health and fertility, positive signals of potential childbearing and child-rearing. Many human sexual signals are specific to one gender or the other. Some of these gender signals are obvious enough, such as the broader shoulders of the male and the narrower waist of the female. The smooth skin and soft roundedness of the female body, and of course the high-pitched voice, are juvenile qualities making males feel protective. The thick neck, facial hair, deep voice and muscular torso of the male offer a strong visual contrast, saying, "I'm a protector." There are many ways in which they can transmit sexual signals. Smile, of course, and for long-haired individuals, the unconscious grooming of the hair, which says, in effect, "Look, I'm making myself more attractive, more appealing for you." Then there's that human speciality made possible by our naked skin, the blush. This blushing of the visible skin as a social signal is superficially similar to the flushing that occurs in the final stages of lovemaking. The rounded hemispherical breasts of the human female transmit a powerful sexual signal, unique to our species. Breasts may have a maternal function, but their shape is purely sexual in significance. This breast shape appears to have evolved as a mimic of the rounded buttocks. Most female primate sexual signals occur in the rump region, but in our species, with its vertical body posture, it was necessary to have a frontal display as well. Elder sexual signals are also transmitted by the rounded female shoulders and the smooth, rounded knees, again providing visual echoes of the primeval buttock display. Another form of self-mimicry. The large female lips, in both shape and color, mimic the external genitals. When the labia redden during sexual arousal, the lips also become swollen and redder, a change artificially heightened by the application of lipstick, a cultural exaggeration that's been employed by women since the days of ancient Egypt.
Now, amazingly, while we all engage with beauty, without our knowledge, beauty also engages us. Our brains respond to attractive faces even when we're not thinking about beauty. So taken together, these studies suggest that our brain automatically responds to beauty by linking vision and pleasure. These beauty detectors, it seems, ping every time we see beauty, regardless of whatever else we might be thinking.
We can say that the experience of beauty is one of the ways that evolution has of arousing and sustaining interest or fascination, even obsession, in order to encourage us toward making the most adaptive decisions for survival and reproduction.
Wherever you look as you go around the globe, there are local beauty standards that are sometimes strange to foreign eyes. But although beauty standards do vary around the world, there are a few universals that apply to the whole human species. When a survey of sexual appeal was made in 190 different societies around the world, it was discovered that the most important feature, common to all cultures, was a healthy body and a clear, unblemished skin.
Attractive faces activate parts of our visual cortex in the back of the brain, an area called the fusiform gyrus that is especially tuned to processing faces, and an adjacent area called the lateral occipital complex that is especially tuned to processing objects. In addition, attractive faces activates parts of our reward and pleasure centers in the front and deep in the brain. So our visual brain that is tuned to processing faces interacts with our pleasure centers to underpin the experience of beauty.
Beauty is nature's way of acting at a distance, so to speak. I mean, you can't expect to eat an adaptively beneficial landscape. It would hardly do to eat your baby or your lover. So evolution's trick is to make them beautiful, to have them exert a kind of magnetism, to give you the pleasure of simply looking at them. But, someone might argue, that's natural beauty. How about artistic beauty? Isn't that exhaustively cultural? No, I don't think it is. I have in mind the so-called Acheulean hand axes. The oldest stone tools are choppers from the Olduvai Gorge in East Africa. They go back about 2.5 million years. These Acheulean hand axes have been unearthed in their thousands, scattered across Asia, Europe, and Africa. Almost everywhere Homo erectus and Homo ergaster roamed. Now, the sheer numbers of these hand axes shows that they can't have been made for butchering animals. And the plot really thickens when you realize that, unlike other Pleistocene tools, the hand axes often exhibit no evidence of wear on their delicate blade edges. And some, in any event, are too big to use for butchery. Their symmetry, their attractive materials, and above all, their meticulous workmanship are simply quite beautiful to our eyes, even today. So, what were these ancient, they're ancient, they're foreign, but they're at the same time somehow familiar. What were these artifacts for? Competently made hand axes indicated desirable personal qualities: intelligence, fine motor control, planning ability, conscientiousness, and sometimes access to rare materials. Over tens of thousands of generations, such skills increased the status of those who displayed them and gained a reproductive advantage over the less capable. Except, of course, what's interesting about this is that we can't be sure how that idea was conveyed, because the Homo erectus that made these objects did not have language. It's hard to grasp, but it's an incredible fact. By the end of the hand axe epoch, Homo sapiens, as they were then called finally, were doubtless finding new ways to amuse and amaze each other by, who knows, telling jokes, storytelling, dancing, or hairstyling. So the next time you pass by a jewelry shop window displaying a beautifully cut teardrop-shaped stone, don't be so sure it's just your culture telling you that that sparkling jewel is beautiful. Your distant ancestors loved that shape and found beauty in the skill needed to make it, even before they could put their love into words.
Lots of different traits for men and women has historically led to outsized mating opportunities and access to resources. Intelligence, kindness, strength, humor, hunting ability, storytelling ability, and many other attributes. But what is our modern version of a peacock's tail? Well, we make social statements with our cars, our clothes, our technology, our houses, our toys, our comments, and even our friends.
Well, here's the study. More than 1,000 respondents, primarily female. The number of partners is an index of how often this individual is chosen by the other sex. Results, male criteria. For women, the correlation between their fertility rates and the number of partners in the previous year was 0.94. So that's basically markers of biological youth. And also markers of biological health, like symmetry, or waist to hip ratio, which actually tends to be correlated with reproductive fitness because women with lower waist to hip ratios are generally healthier. Female criteria. All respondents. The correlation between socioeconomic status and frequency of simultaneous partners. For men, it's 0.5.
Which is a higher correlation than the correlation between general cognitive ability and grades. And I use that as an example because that's one of the most robust and powerful findings in the social sciences. Whereas the correlation between socioeconomic status and perceived mate attractiveness for women by men is 0 or slightly negative. So it's a walloping difference, and that's associated with the proclivity of women to preferentially mate across hierarchies and up, and men to mate across hierarchies and down.
For the past billion years, your ancestors reproduced sexually. And from what evidence that we have, dominance among men translates into mating and reproductive opportunities. So we're a species that's experienced an evolutionary history in which our male ancestors won mating opportunities through the use of force or threat of force. In that regard, our apple has not fallen far from the evolutionary tree. But in other ways, human mating and human reproduction are profoundly different from what we see in our close relatives, and they've changed a lot since our early ancestors. For example, males in chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas spend time and effort competing for mates, but they don't spend much time together with individual females, and they don't provide resources, they don't provide food for their offspring. So that's a big change. On the average forager, the average hunter-gatherer society, almost 80% of married women are married monogamously, so that's a difference with other primates. And importantly, men invest in their mates and offspring. They provide resources for their mates and offspring. So how did we get there? In species where males fight each other for mates, dominant males, indicated by the larger, darker male symbols here, tend to have more mating opportunities and hence leave more offspring. And subordinate males tend to have fewer mating opportunities. They're more likely to fail to reproduce, not to leave any offspring at all. So this sets up an interesting situation, because for subordinate males, it would actually be advantageous to attempt monogamy rather than attempting to win lots of mating opportunities. One mate is better than none. The problem is that, in general, subordinate males cannot defend females from dominant males, and besides, females tend to prefer mating with dominant males for the genetic benefits, producing stronger, healthier offspring. So what changed all of this was probably several transitions happening together around the same time. By about 2.5 million years ago, we had started to incorporate more meat into our diet. And then by about 2 million years ago, brain size really started to increase, and with that became a lengthening of the juvenile period. So now kids became both really costly and costly for a long period of time. This made male provisioning both possible and necessary. Possible because it's much easier to bring back calories, protein, fats in the form of meat than trying to do that by transporting plant foods. And necessary because kids became so energetically costly that individual females would have had trouble providing resources for themselves and their offspring. These are aggregate data across several hunter-gatherer societies on net daily calories. Men from about 20 years of age to 60 years of age are operating at a daily caloric surplus. They bring in, generally through hunting, more calories than they can consume, and these calories are distributed. If it's large game, it's generally distributed equally to everybody in the village or camp. If it's smaller items can be brought back to the individual family. But this contrasts with what's going on with women, which is when they're in their reproductive years, they're operating in a daily caloric deficit. Gestation, lactation, carrying babies are extremely costly energetically, and furthermore, they limit one's ability to forage efficiently. So male provisioning, both possible through hunting and necessary, and this change had profound impacts on human mating and reproduction. In a sense, it tipped the balance for females, so now it was sometimes worth mating with a subordinate male, even if he may not possess the best quality genes, if he provided resources. The evidence indicates that we've evolved to suppress cues to ovulation, that in a sense, ovulation is concealed in humans. But think about what impact this would have. This would mean that dominant males would not be able to monopolize copulations near ovulation. In a sense, it would protect the pair bond from invasion by a dominant male, so that the male in a pair would have more confidence that he was the father of any resulting offspring. The couple is having sex throughout the cycle. And this is something unusual about human mating that we don't see in many other primates, but we have sex all throughout the cycle. And so this would essentially increase a male's confidence in paternity, because a dominant male or some other male wouldn't be able to target the female and bully his way in at the fertile point in the cycle. And this would have important implications for parental investment, in particular males providing resources for their offspring. Because across species, when males provide resources for offspring, they target those resources toward their own biological offspring, and they avoid investing in the offspring of unrelated males. And so the evolution of male care for offspring and investing in resources in offspring, pair bonding, and concealed ovulation went very much hand in hand over our evolution.
Evolutionary psychologists don't assume that women are after wealth. What they assume is that women will use markers of wealth as indicators of productive competence.
Our desires aren't just biological, personal, individual, or based on use value, usefulness, or exchange value, but are socially constructed too. We are coded to desire socially, depending on others, depending on our social context, and this affects us. This determines how and what we think.
The dominance hierarchy as a structure is at least 300 million years old, which makes it older than trees, and it's for that reason that you share the same neurobiology to govern your observations of your position in the hierarchy as lobsters do. Now, we tend to think of the social structure as something other than nature, right? Because society is, I suppose, mythologically opposed. It's opposed in a narrative way. Culture is opposed to nature. It's the town in the forest. But the town has been around a long time, so to speak, and the structure of the town is also part of nature, in that the dominance hierarchy is part of nature. And because it's so ancient, you have to consider it as part of the mechanism that has played the role of selection in the process of natural selection.
There are natural limits on sexually selected traits because they're not social but biological and are physically connected to the metabolism and environment of an organism. But in a social species such as ours, biological markers were unnecessary as displays of sexual health, and instead we evolved to rely on social cues. Modern human signaling is limited only by the amount of energy available to individuals, which in our modern society is incredibly high. What such a high societal throughput means is that our sexually directed traits can grow disproportionately large and wasteful, and largely untethered from our biological fitness. And this goes way beyond sex and mating. We are constantly, consciously or otherwise, comparing ourselves to others, being popular, accepted, sending and receiving social signals. Our modern culture has equated money and the things it buys as a primary scorecard for social status. There's a term called conspicuous consumption, which is the expenditure on or consumption of luxuries on a lavish scale in an attempt to enhance one's prestige. But what ends up happening is we purchase things that we don't really need or use and don't make us happy because it's culturally approved and gives us status to do so. A final important point. For most of our history, we were egalitarian on consumption of resources, unlike today. But we're never egalitarian on social status. Status and social rank has always been important for humans and other biological organisms. But differential consumption levels of stuff has only been the case for the last 10,000 out of 300,000 years we've been a species. How we measure status might change again in your lifetimes, perhaps soon. We evolve to posture sexually to attract mates. In modern cultures, this is directly linked to the burning of non-renewable resources. Think about the next time you're shopping or in a city.
Resources have always been important, especially to women. So is a man able to acquire resources, and is he willing to dispense them to her and her kids? So that's always important. In traditional cultures, that boils down to hunting skills. So now what's interesting about modern culture is we have cash economies.
Economic inequality is historically high. That the wealthiest 1/10 of 1% in the United States have as much wealth as the bottom 90% combined. Or that the wealthiest 8 individuals in the world have as much wealth as the poorest 3.5 billion inhabitants of the planet. Did you know that economic inequality is associated with shorter lifespans, less happiness, more crime, and more drug abuse? Because the truth is, feeling less than other people brings shame. It makes people turn away, disgusted with the system. Feeling better than other people, though, now that is motivating. It motivates us to protect that position.
Humans organize social life. They organize and distribute power and wealth. How that power and wealth is distributed amongst people has not tended towards equality. Instead, distribution of wealth and power, or capital, has produced a class system. And how that class system is produced and reproduced changes across time and place, but profoundly impacts on people's lives and identities. This 3-tier system of working class, middle and upper class has really defined the Western world for much of the 19th and 20th centuries. George Simmel proposed in an article first published in 1904 a theory of fashion based on class differentiation. So according to Simmel, the mechanism of changing fashion has to do with the need of the elite to distinguish the status from the lower classes. The immediately lower classes, so i.e. the middle class, will seek to emulate the upper classes by adopting their new fashions, whereupon the elite will discard it in favour of a new style to maintain their distinction, or to use Simmel's term, prestige. So this theory is often referred to as the trickle-down theory of fashion, where the lower classes emulate the upper classes. Your habitus is durable in that they last throughout your life, and transposable in that they are transported from one setting to another. So we take our habitus with us throughout our lives and into the different settings we find ourselves in. But based on extensive research project into the taste of the French population during the 1960s, Bourdieu argued that taste is governed by social class. So tell us what music you listen to, what you do in your spare time, what you like to eat and how you dress. and he would able to determine your class and thereby your access to cultural, social, symbolic and economic capital. So the part of this argument is that we are each a product of our habitus. It is inescapable but also invisible to us. We feel that our taste, values and preferences are our own, but really they are the product of the social, cultural and economic structures within which we are embedded. And habitus also involves the bodily dispositions which appear natural but are actually social. So for example, how we walk, talk, gesture, eat, sit, etc. are all the result of our habitus.
Fashion is such an important part of global histories because it connects to global trade, so it's about money and commerce and industry. It's also about creativity and artistry. It's also something that we can think about in terms of social and cultural identities. So it's about change, it's time-based, it's about clothing, grooming, the way you present your body, and it's about this enormous international network of media, industries, craftspeople, as I said, who are all working towards shaping the ways that we dress and the things that we buy to clothe our bodies. And also at street level, the way that people are using it to convey a particular sense of self, to talk about the way they think of themselves as a particular gender or as a fluid gender identity, their sexual identity, their ethnic identity, and their religious identities. All these things may be expressed through the fashions that they wear. It's also representing who we are and who we might want ourselves to be in the future. Fashion can also be a way to reimagine yourself and to enter an escapist land of dreams. Fashion therefore links to politics and morality. Anything that connects to your body and to sexuality is inevitably going to be caught up with contemporary mores. But clearly fashion is about politics, society, culture. It's about fun and being expressive, it's about art, but it's also about, cash, it's about capitalism, it's about persuading us to buy particular things.
Here's something I really got in trouble for. So I was doing an interview with NBC reporter, I don't remember who it was, but he didn't like me at all. So he was trying to catch me out on all sorts of things. And we talked about makeup in the workplace. And I said that women use makeup to enhance their sexual attractiveness. The idea that lipstick and makeup has nothing to do with sexual attractiveness, if you believe that, you're an idiot.
We also have a beauty is good stereotype embedded in the brain. Our brains seem to reflexively associate beauty and good. And this reflexive association may be the biologic trigger for the many social effects of beauty. Attractive people receive all kinds of advantages in life. They're regarded as more intelligent, more trustworthy. They're given higher pay and lesser punishments, even when such judgments are not warranted. In my lab, we recently found that people with minor facial anomalies and disfigurements are regarded as less good, less kind, less intelligent, less competent, and less hardworking.
We have come from a patriarchal world in which
male alliances tend to support males and take advantage of the fact that they have political power at the expense of females. And I would say that that all goes back to what happened 300,000 to 400,000 years ago, when the beta males took charge and they started imposing their own norms on society as a whole, and they've continued to do so.
The research community agrees. Women who wear some makeup are more likely to get the job and make more money, even if the time and cost of beauty disadvantages them.
We wear makeup to shape the way other people perceive us.
During her teens, Cardi B was employed at a deli in Tribeca. She was fired and her manager suggested that she apply to be a stripper at the strip club across the street. Cardi B has said that becoming a stripper was positive for her life in many ways. It really saved me from a lot of things. When I started stripping, I went back to school. She has stated that she became a stripper in order to escape poverty and domestic violence. It seems that Cardi B has a very positive outlook on her career choice, on what she's doing, and especially what it brought her. An education, financial stability, things that weren't as accessible to women back then. When did self-objectification, because that's how they call it, became female empowerment? It's true for female sexuality. Using self-objectification doesn't sound super feminist, but it also sends another message. The message that you can rise in society and earn as much money as the people who oppressed you or the men who neglected you.
Women are not making it to the top of any profession anywhere in the world. The numbers tell the story quite clearly. 190 heads of state, 9 are women. Of all the people in parliament in the world, 13% are women. In the corporate sector, women at the top, C-level jobs, board seats, tops out at 15–16%. Women do not negotiate for themselves in the workforce. A study in the last 2 years of people entering the workforce out of college showed that 57% of boys entering, or men, I guess, are negotiating their first salary, and only 7% of women. And most importantly, men attribute their success to themselves and women attribute it to other external factors.
Women conceal, we highlight, we contour, all out of habit, without ever really asking why. Society tells us we need makeup to look and feel complete. Over the course of our lifetimes, women spend about $200,000 on our appearance, while men come in at around $175,000. That includes everything from moisturizer to shampoo. So why is makeup a big deal? Well, because when we look at spending month to month, of the roughly $315 we spend on grooming, women shell out nearly $91 on cosmetics alone. But men, of $245, a mere $51 goes towards their faces. And then there's the most precious resource, time.
The time, for example, it takes for women to apply makeup in the morning, to do their hair, is labor that they're performing that males don't have to. So instead, what men are doing is they're able to maybe work overtime. They are able to attend social or networking activities that women don't have access to. They're able to train and build skill because they have more time to do that.
Is what does it mean to grow up in a pornified culture? What does it mean to live in a society where you are surrounded by images of hypersexualized, pornified women? What does it mean when you live in a society where basically pop culture is shaped by those pornographic images? This culture is socializing our young girls to be ready for pornography, whether they ever end up on a porn site or not. And the reason for that is they are being taught to hypersexualize and pornify themselves. Now, what happens to young girls is when they are developing their sexual identity, what they learn is they have two choices, either fuckability or invisibility. And what do you want from a teenager when built into the DNA of adolescence is the need to be visible? What do you want from her when her friends are walking around with low-slung jeans, a tramp stamp, with both midriff showing, what do you want her to do? Because it is impossible to ask her to go for invisibility. So this is not a choice. This is being forced into a type of sexuality that she didn't invent, that she didn't decide, because there are so few choices.
I think that women believe that being a sex object is empowering because it makes them feel as though they are wanted and desired. But the idea that our bodies are our value means that we are forever dependent upon men to validate us. We're dependent upon an outside source to say that we are important, to say that we are valuable. So I think women engage in hookup culture because it fits right into this. What's the ultimate way to get validation? It's to be wanted sexually. If someone values you and wants to have sex with you, then for that brief moment in time, we feel validated. We feel like we matter. We feel like we have worth.
We all hunger for visibility. This is the human condition. We want to be valued. We want to be visible. Yet in this culture, we say to young women, in order to be visible, in order to be noticed, in order to be desired, you have to A, look a certain way, and B, behave a certain way. And if you don't, then you are basically rendered invisible.
There's this thing now where women who are dressed basically in spandex, clingy underpants and sports bras, and they're filming themselves at the gym, and then they complain that men are ogling them, that men are looking at them. So look, here's a trick for understanding the world, because I understand it's really easy to just say, oh, come on, you dress like that, and you want attention, blah, 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 right? Now, of course, we're not evolved to meet strangers, right? We're not evolved to date strangers. We're not evolved to need to put all of this stuff on display, for the simple reason that we grew up in small tribes, we grew up in local farming communities, we grew up in little villages, so whoever you would marry, or whoever you'd be interested in, you'd know whether they were single, you'd know their family, you'd know their history, you would have grown up together, you'd know their personality. So this idea that we're just really, really well designed to go out and pick rando strangers to become our lifelong mates and the parents to our children, we're not good at that. We're not evolved for that. A woman who has a really good figure and so on, she obviously is going to want to flaunt it to try and attract a high quality, high value mate, but she's going to want to chase away or keep away the men that she doesn't want to approach her, right? So this is a sort of shaming thing that is designed to keep the lower quality men away by having them lose their confidence. Clearly, these women are putting the men in the gym into an impossible situation. An impossible situation, which is, you want to work out, as a male, your eyes will be drawn to attractive females. That's just the way it is. I'm going to be super attractive, but don't you dare look.
bank Lehman Brothers Paul Nurse wrote that we must shift America from a needs to a desires culture. People must be trained to desire, to want new things even before the old had been entirely consumed. We must shape a new mentality of America. Man's desires must overshadow his needs.
Now you see, when your identity is defined by society, you cannot resist it. You don't have the knowledge, you don't have the wisdom, you don't have the resources to understand that something's being put over on you. You cannot but help believe the definition of you as a free agent. But you believe yourself to be a free agent as a result of not being free. That is to say, of being hopelessly unable to resist society's identification of you.
There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else.
The study we published last year called The Network of Global Corporate Control was the first extensive analysis of economic networks. Looking at ownership networks actually can give you answers to questions like, who are the key players? How are they organized? Are they isolated? Are they interconnected? And what is the overall distribution of control? In other words, who controls the world? So what did we find after computing all this network control? Well, it turns out that the 737 top shareholders have the potential to collectively control 80% of the TNC's value. They're mostly financial institutions in the US and the UK. And it gets even more extreme. There are 146 top players in the car, and they together have the potential to collectively control 40% of the TNC's value. What should you take home from all of this? The high degree of control you saw is very extreme by any standard.
They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. By the way, it's the same big club they used to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged. And nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all.
Everyone can aspire and achieve eventually private luxury. We all think we're going to get there eventually, don't we? We think sort of, we might be downtrodden now, but eventually we're going to be that guy sitting in the big mansion on the hill. The problem is, there is literally not enough physical or ecological space for everybody to do that. The only reason why some people are able to pursue private luxury is that other people aren't. And yet the entire justification of the system is based on the principle that we shall all pursue private luxury. Now, an ideology is a system of thought which structures the way that we see the world. A successful ideology is one that tells you there's no other way of seeing the world.
We're all consumers. That is, we all in our economic system have to go out every day and buy some or a lot of food, clothing, shelter, entertainment, transportation, all the things of life. Consumerism is when we give them more importance than what they kind of ought to have. If you think of yourself as a worker, you right away understand that you're a worker and somebody else is a boss. If you think of yourself primarily as a consumer, then the thing that interests you most, for example, when you have a struggle on the job, is getting more money, because that can allow you to consume more. Employer can recover whatever it is he has to pay you in higher wage by changing the conditions of your work, making you work harder, making you work faster, making you come earlier, making you stay later. And if none of those things suffice, there's this other interesting thing that employers can do. They can jack up the price of what they sell to recoup whatever they have to pay you in a higher wage. And you're going to have to use your higher wage to pay the higher price, leaving you not that much better off.
Retail analyst Victor Labow wrote in 1955, "Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replaced and discarded at an ever-accelerating rate. The landscape of desire was where production, consumption, marketing, advertising, and the individual met."
If you look at advertising, it's a very interesting history. In the first period of advertising, we can say right up until about the 1920s, advertising talked about goods themselves. They talked about how they were made, what they did, how well they lasted, etc. It really is a discourse about objects, about what goods did. However, starting around 1920, that changes. And from that period on, advertising doesn't really talk about goods themselves. They talk about the relationship of goods to our needs.
Consumerism, which could basically be defined as the idea that we achieve well-being by acquiring goods and services, is something which has been handed to us by a system of thought creation through marketing, through advertising, through the think tanks who are always coming up with more and more justifications for crazy stuff, but especially through an incredibly powerful political mechanism which we scarcely ever regard as such, which is celebrity. Celebrity is the handmaiden of consumerism. It is absolutely essential to the system. And what we see with the rise of consumerism over the past century has been a rise in celebrity culture running alongside it. This is why there has been a rise in celebrity culture. The reason is that celebrity exists to sell stuff. That doesn't mean that every single person who's a celebrity has the aim of selling stuff, but it means that as a general trend and as an obsession, as a societal obsession, this trend has developed as a result of the necessity for corporations to connect with customers.
If you look at the human animal, The human animal is like a machine. There are systems inside our bodies that are trying to get us to do things that are in the interest of the survival of the human animal, right? Inside our bodies are chemicals that are trying to get us to do things that are in the best interest of us. If you've ever had a feeling of happiness, pride, joy, love, fulfillment, all of these feelings that we have are chemically produced feelings. And they're produced by 4 chemicals predominantly: endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. The caveman reason for this stuff, because this stuff was all from 50,000 years ago, understand, Homo sapien existed at the same time as other hominid species, and yet we survived and they didn't. What is it about this species that's so good at survival and thriving? Look at the world we've built. It's not just that we're smart. We're certainly not the strongest and we're certainly not the smartest. It's that we're social animals. We have to do things together. We have to look after each other, and we have to work together to ensure that we survive, that we do well. This is how we're designed, right? These chemicals are trying to make that happen. Endorphins are designed to do one thing and one thing only: mask physical pain. Dopamine is the feeling that you found something you're looking for, or that you accomplished something you set out to accomplish. The whole purpose of dopamine is to make sure that we get stuff done. Oxytocin is the feeling of love, trust, and friendship. It's all the warm and fuzzies, it's all the unicorns and rainbows. It's the reason we like to spend time with our friends even if we don't do anything with them. Serotonin is the leadership chemical, is responsible for feelings of pride and status. This is why public recognition is very important. We are social animals and we need the recognition of others. This is why we have the Oscars and this is why we have public awards events. The problem is you can trick serotonin. We live in a materialist society, so we judge status very often in our country based on how much money you make, right? So any conspicuous display of wealth raises your status. This is why they put the logos on the outside. No good on the inside, nobody can see them. We want the red line of our Prada glasses. How good, you own a pair of designer shoes, how good does it feel to put on your Gucci shoes? Oh my God, it feels so good. You walk out and you feel $1 million. You can actually feel your confidence rise when you put on the stuff, right? Because it's showing this display of status. It feels great. The problem is there was no real relationship that was reinforced because of it. You tricked the system. That's why we keep trying to accomplish things and accumulate more and more material goods, and yet we never feel successful because there was no relationship. We tricked it, we gamed it.
Fashion brands aren't selling clothing. They're selling a lifestyle and social status. You need people to believe that only the upper rungs of society can wear your brand. This way people will be willing to spend thousands of dollars extra to have your brand logo on their clothes. To build this image, you need to keep the prices of your products unreasonably expensive. This way consumers can show the world that they're rich so they can afford to squander their money on materialistic indulgences. States like California, Nevada, Texas, New York, and Florida all have very high income inequality and high interest in luxury fashion. When you live in an area with high income inequality, there's a tremendous social pressure to appear wealthy. If you report, the last thing you want is for other people to know that you're poor. For a lot of people, luxury clothes are nothing more than an extremely expensive signaling mechanism. And when people spend the majority of their disposable income on luxury consumption, they're trapped in a cycle of poverty and can never achieve financial freedom. Thus, luxury fashion houses both benefit from and perpetuate income inequality.
Goods don't make us very happy. Goods are not central to satisfaction. What actually really makes people happy are non-material things. What makes people happy seems to be things connected with sociability. I don't mean to say by that material things have nothing to do with happiness. Poor people are not happy. They don't have access to clean drinking water. They don't have access to food. They don't have access to shelter. So it's not that material things are not connected to happiness. They are to some degree. But once you get past a certain level of comfort, material things simply don't provide us happiness. At the same time, there is this giant propaganda system of advertising that is, again, perpetually telling us that the way to happiness is through objects, the way to happiness is through consumption. What makes people happy are things to do with society, with connection, with personal connection, with autonomy, with relaxation. And in fact, when you ask people what it is that makes them happy, goods very rarely come into it. However, the problem is that capitalism has to sell goods. The marketplace provides goods, and therefore, what it did was it took the images of the life that people really want, which is a life of meaning, of connection, of sociability, of friendship, of family, of intimacy, of sexuality. Those are the images that it took, and it linked them to objects. And so advertising is both true and false at the same time. If it was simply false, it wouldn't work. But advertising is true to the extent that it reflects our real desires.
If we are interested in maximizing the welfare of our citizens, the way to do that is to maximize individual freedom. The way to maximize freedom is to maximize choice. The more choice people have, the more freedom they have, and the more freedom they have, the more welfare they have. This, I think, is so deeply embedded in the water supply that it wouldn't occur to anyone to question it. In other aspects of life that are much more significant than buying things, the same explosion of choice is true. So everywhere we look, big things and small things, material things and lifestyle things, life is a matter of choice. And the question is this good news or bad news? All of this choice has two negative effects on people. One effect, paradoxically, is that it produces paralysis rather than liberation. With so many options to choose from, people find it very difficult to choose at all. The second effect is that even if we manage to overcome the paralysis and make a choice, we end up less satisfied with the result of the choice than we would be if we had fewer options to choose from. When there are hundreds of different styles of jeans available, and you buy one that is disappointing, and you ask why, who's responsible, it is equally clear that the answer to the question is you. You could have done better. With 100 different kinds of jeans on display, there is no excuse for failure. And so when people make decisions, and even though the results of the decisions are good, they feel disappointed about them, they blame themselves. Clinical depression has exploded in the industrial world in the last generation. I believe a significant, not the only, but a significant contributor to this explosion of depression and also suicide is that people have experiences that are disappointing because their standards are so high, and then when they have to explain these experiences to themselves, they think they're at fault.
What we now know 20 years later and hundreds of studies later is that the more that people are focused on those materialistic values, the more that they say that money and image and status and possessions are important to them, the less happy they are. The more depressed they are, the more anxious they are. We know that all of these kinds of psychological problems tend to go up as materialistic values go up.
I try to understand better why people doesn't realize that they are becoming poorer and poorer, and I ask myself, okay, but what has changed instead of when I was young? And fashion is something that has dramatically changed.
Today we purchase over 80 billion pieces of new clothing each year. That's 400% more than the amount we bought just 2 decades ago.
But also from the consumer point of view, is it really democratic to buy a t-shirt for $5, a pair of jeans for $20? Or are they taking us for a ride? Because they're making us believe that we are rich or wealthy because we can buy a lot. But in fact, they're making us poorer. And the only person who is becoming richer is the owner of the fast fashion brand.
This is a marketing holocaust. 24 hours a day for the rest of our lives. The powers that be are hard at work, dumbing us to death.
You can have the best of materials moving into the high-end fashion market in Milan or Paris or London, but there has been so much of work which has gone behind it, and so much of chemicals has gone into it. The effluents have been discharged into so many rivers. But we are only looking at that point of time into the finished product.
Fashion today is the number 2 most polluting industry on Earth, second only to the oil industry. The alarming thing is that not only is fashion using a huge amount of natural resources and creating staggering environmental impacts, these natural resources and this impact is often not even measured. The average American throws away 82 pounds of textile waste each year, adding up to more than 11 million tons of textile waste from the US alone. Most of this waste is non-biodegradable, meaning it sits in landfills for 200 years or more while releasing harmful gases into the air.
Sensible level of maximum consumption is about 50 billion tons of material per year. We're currently using 80 billion tons. If we carry on as we are with business as usual, by 2050 we'll be using 180 billion tons.
So you get cancer, there are more profits. For them it's a win, 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 win. As for nature and people, it's a lose, 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 lose.
The business of beauty can be very ugly, especially in the cutthroat world of modelling. It's an industry that wants to portray itself as the epitome of health and happiness. The reality, though, is anything but. Anorexia, drug use and bullying are as routine as smiling for the cameras.
Groomed by a much older man. I've been sexually assaulted multiple times. I've been told to do cocaine to lose weight by my agent. I'd been told whilst I was underage to just have lots of sex to lose weight.
I had an eating disorder. I was reliant on anti-anxiety medication. I was having panic attacks constantly. I was exhausted. My body was malnourished. My mind was malnourished.
For millions of women, Victoria's Secret was the ultimate in glamour.
Toxic culture at Victoria's Secret. Models being ogled by executives, manhandled and harassed.
American women put an average of 168 chemicals on their bodies each day. Many of these chemicals are called endocrine disruptors, which can inhibit our body's ability to balance hormones naturally, and are linked with developmental, reproductive, brain, immune, and other problems.
The combined evidence suggests that neurodevelopmental disorders caused by industrial chemicals has created a silent pandemic in modern society. So what does the chemical industry say? That there's no reason to worry. Why? Because the chemicals are safe? Because the doses are so low. Parts per billion.
A lot of clothes in American stores are made in Bangladesh by workers who earn about $2 a day.
Bangladesh is now the second largest apparel exporter after China.
You know, we are actually profiting from their need to work, to use them as slaves.
The year following the global fashion industry is now an almost $3 trillion annual industry. It was now the case that 3 of the 4 worst tragedies in the history of fashion had all happened in the last year.
Capitalism is the reason the fashion industry looks as it does today. It's the reason why workers in Bangladesh are paid so little, because if you're operating in a capitalist system, the main thing you have to do is create profit, and you have to create more profit than your competitors. And this is what drives companies to push wages down and down and down.
The question is, how is it possible that the most intellectual creature that's ever walked on planet Earth is destroying its only home?
The real problem of humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike